Welcome back to the Veteran Teacher Files. I'm your host, the Dragon Lady, and tonight's episode is a reflective gripe. Not a rage episode, not a fix the entire system episode, just a veteran teacher sitting back and asking a question that I cannot stop thinking about. Why don't we talk about grades? And I don't mean data meetings, because we have plenty of those. We can meet about data until the sun goes down and comes back up again. We can analyze benchmark scores, intervention groups, and dashboards like we were decoding ancient texts. But what I'm talking about is something simpler, more uncomfortable, more personal. Grades. The things that end up on a report card. The things that become GPAs. The things that follow students long after they leave our classrooms. The things colleges look at, parents celebrate, and students use to measure their own growth. And yet, in over 20 years of education, I can count on one hand the number of times I've had a real conversation about what those grades actually mean. So, let me take you back on a journey. My first teaching assignment was at a program improvement school. It was in its second year of program improvement status. So yeah, I arrived right on schedule for the chaos. I was in survival mode. I had a K1 overflow class. I was in grad school. I was doing BITSA, which, if you know, you know. If you don't know, imagine writing your entire soul into binders while trying not to cry into a stack of lesson plans. And somewhere in all that, I noticed something strange. I don't actually remember entering grades, because I didn't. There was this woman who would come into my classroom every grading period. She would sit at one of those colorful old Macintosh computers under my window. You know, back when the computers looked like they could double as a small refrigerator. And she would enter all of my grades for me. Now, since starting this podcast, I've been remembering a lot of people's names, and I can't remember hers or her title. I remember that she loved Cheez-Its and she had cats. Honestly, I barely remember my own name that year. But she'd sit there for hours, clicking away, and then my report cards would magically appear, ready for comments. At the time, I didn't question it. I was too busy trying to keep 6-year-olds from licking glue sticks. So that was school number 1, survival mode grading assistance. And then I moved schools. And this second school was a completely different universe. We were standards-based before standards-based became a buzzworthy word that people put on slideshows. We didn't have a curriculum. We built our own. We did report cards by hand. I had 28 students, and we used carbon triplicates, so 3 copies of everything. If you made a mistake, congratulations. You just made it 3 times, and created your own version of a pop quiz called How Careful Are You Under Pressure? And at that school, we talked about data constantly, daily even. We looked at student work, we looked at scores, we looked at trends, we asked questions. But here's what I don't remember ever happening: a real conversation about grading itself. Not what did the students get, but what does the grade mean? What counts? What doesn't? Maybe those conversations happened somewhere in the building, but if they did, they didn't leave a lasting impression with me because they weren't explicit, they weren't intentional, they were just kind of happening. So, you know, those 4 questions from the PLC: what do we want students to learn? How will we know if they've learned it? What will we do if they don't learn it? Now I'm missing one because there's 4 questions. That school was really good at that part. but not the actual what are we putting in our grade book and how are we weighing this. So, fast forward to my middle school years, and this is where something different happened. I had an amazing teaching partner, and my husband knows her as the red-headed runner chick. And we taught different subjects. I taught math and science, and she taught ELA and social studies. And one day, we decided to take a release day off for planning. Honestly, I don't remember how that got started. I think we took the day off for planning, but now that I'm saying it out loud, that doesn't make sense because I had math and she had ELA. So, anyways, there wasn't an agenda. There wasn't an administrator with us. There was no protocol or sticky notes on chart papers. It was just the both of us trying to be responsible adults. And I think really what we were trying to talk about that day and why this hit me so hard is that we were there to talk about grades. And we did something that in hindsight feels almost rare in education because we spent nearly the entire day calibrating our grade books. Not our curriculum, not our lesson plans, our grade books. And no, we were not sitting around sipping coffee, discussing the philosophy of education like we were in a TED Talk. We got into the weeds. We were talking about completion grades. We used a simple system. 2 points for complete, 1 point for partial or incomplete, 0 points for missing, and half a point for late or makeup work. Now that might sound small, but if one teacher gives full credit or for late work and the other one doesn't, you can basically end up with 2 completely different versions of reality on a report card. And then we talked about homework. How much should it count? 10%? 20%? Should it even be graded for accuracy? We talked about tests and quizzes. How much weight should they carry? What happens when a student bombs a test but shows mastery later? Do we allow retakes? Unlimited retakes? 1 retake? Open notes? No retakes. We talked about projects. Are we grading content mastery? Or are we accidentally grading who has a parent at home with a glue gun and a Cricut machine? We talked about participation. Should it count? What about the quiet kids? What about students who understand everything but speak once every lunar eclipse? And here's the funny part. None of this was revolutionary. We weren't rewriting education. We weren't publishing a grading manifesto. We were just trying to make sure we weren't accidentally creating 2 completely different grading universes in the same school. But something interesting happened. We held each other accountable. We had to explain our thinking out loud. We had to justify why something counted or didn't. We couldn't just say, that's how I do it, or that's how it's always been done, because now someone else knew how we did it. And over time, something started to show up. If a student was doing well in her class, there was a pretty good chance they were doing well in mine. If a student was struggling in my class, there was a good chance she was seeing the same thing. Not because students are identical across subjects. They're not. Some kids are math kids, some kids are writers. Some kids are just trying to survive until recess. But because the grading system wasn't wildly different from class to class, the message students were receiving was more consistent. And that matters because students don't experience school in subjects. They experience school as one system, one report card, one GPA, one story being told about them. Fast forward to the last few years. I've been sitting at a site where grading has become, well, let's just say inconsistent. You can walk into one classroom and think, wow, that kid is crushing it. And then walk into another and think, are they talking about the same student, or do they have a twin that I haven't met? And this year I worked with a coach who I quickly became friends with. And one day we were sitting in her office, just, solving the world's educational problems like it was a casual hobby. And we got to grading. And we started talking about something a little uncomfortable: grade inflation and curriculum watering down, making things easier and easier because we don't want kids to struggle. And let me be clear here. This isn't about blaming teachers. Teachers are doing what they think is best for kids every single day. This is about systems. We started talking about how sometimes we overinflate grades. We lower expectations without realizing it. We make completion look like mastery. We build in safety nets until there are so many nets, nobody's really falling anymore. And then we look at the state dashboard scores and think, wait, why don't these match the GPAs? And that's where my brain keeps going back to the same question. If a student has a passing GPA, but consistently scores below grade level on independent assessments, what are we actually measuring? And why does that feel like a question we don't ask ourselves out loud enough? Because here's the thing. In the 20 plus years of education, I don't remember a training on grading. I've been to some for behavior management, lesson planning, assessment design, instructional strategies, but grading, that was mostly inherited. Whatever your team did, whatever your school did, whatever your mentor did, and that's it. Which brings me back to the real issue. We spend a lot of time talking about data, but very little time talking about the system that produces the data. We analyze dashboards, we analyze benchmarks, we analyze test scores, but we rarely sit down and ask, are our grades actually consistent? Do they mean the same thing across classrooms? Do they reflect mastery, effort, completion, or a mixture of all three? And if they are a mix, do we all agree on the recipe? Because right now, I'm not sure we do. And maybe that's my reflective gripe. Not that grading is broken, not that teachers aren't working hard, not that students aren't trying, but that something this important rarely gets the conversation it deserves. So, I'll leave you with this. When was the last time your school had a real conversation about grading practices? Not data, not testing, not interventions, but grades themselves. And did everyone agree on what they were supposed to mean? If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow, subscribe, and share the Veteran Teacher Files. It helps more educators find the show and join the conversation. Until next time, I'm the Dragon Lady. And these were the Veteran Teacher Files.